The future King of England doesn't faint. That's the rule. That's the image. And yet, according to multiple reports, Prince William did exactly that. At the exact moment the world learned that Kate Middleton had been rushed to the hospital after losing consciousness. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let that sink in for a second. This isn't a tabloid slip-up. This isn't a bad-angle photograph or a misheard quote. This is the kind of moment royal aides are trained for years to prevent, because once it happens, there is no undo button. So here's the question no one was prepared to answer. What could possibly cause the most controlled man in the monarchy to physically collapse? The first whispers didn't come from an official statement. They never do. They came from frantic movements, from doors closing too fast, from schedules suddenly wiped clean, from silence where reassurance should have been. And in that silence, something unsettling began to grow. Kate had gone unconscious. That part is not disputed. But what happened next? How fast it escalated? How little was said? And how visibly shaken William appeared triggered a wave of speculation that the palace simply could not contain. Because when the word coma entered the conversation, everything changed. Coma is not a word the royal family uses lightly. It's not vague. It's not cosmetic. It doesn't leave much room for spin. And that's why this story matters now. This wasn't just a health scare involving a beloved public figure. This was a stress test for the monarchy itself, a moment that peeled back the polished surface and revealed something raw underneath: fear, fragility, and a complete loss of control. Think about it. The royal machine runs on predictability, appearances scheduled months in advance, statements drafted before events even happen, crises rehearsed behind closed doors. And yet, when Kate was rushed to the hospital, none of that choreography seemed to work. Why were initial updates delayed? Why did early accounts contradict one another? And why did William, trained since childhood to master emotion, reportedly reach a breaking point? Here's where the story takes a darker turn. Sources describe a narrow window of time where even senior palace staff didn't have clear answers. Medical teams moved quickly. Phones rang nonstop. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos, William was forced to confront something the crown never prepares you for: the possibility of losing the person who anchors your entire private world. Strip away the titles for a moment. No Prince of Wales. No future king. Just a husband watching the situation spiral beyond his control. And that's the irony no one wants to say out loud. The monarchy sells strength, stability, continuity. But in that moment, it was vulnerable. Human. Terrifyingly uncertain. Publicly, the palace urged calm. Privately, every move suggested urgency. Events were postponed. Routes were altered. Conversations happened behind doors that rarely closed so tightly. And when William appeared again, something was different. Observers noticed it immediately. The stiffness. The hollow focus. The kind of look people get when they've seen something they can't unsee. So ask yourself this: was the fainting the real story, or was it just the first visible crack? Because while cameras and commentators fixated on William's collapse, Kate was already being moved through hospital corridors far from public view, into a situation far more serious than anyone was ready to explain. The moment Prince William went down was the moment everything stopped making sense. Not metaphorically, literally. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Phones paused halfway to ears. Aides, who are trained to react without reacting, suddenly didn't know where to look, because this wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't in the briefing notes. This wasn't supposed to happen. And that's exactly why it mattered. Here's the uncomfortable truth the palace will never put in a press release. Senior royals do not faint in public spaces unless something has gone very, very wrong. Their schedules are cushioned. Their movements are controlled. Their environments are monitored down to lighting, temperature, even how long they're expected to stand. This system exists for one reason: to prevent moments like this. So ask yourself, what kind of news breaks through all that conditioning? According to people familiar with the sequence of events, William had been holding it together right up until he wasn't. The early hours were already tense. Updates about Kate Middleton were coming in fragmented, incomplete, and troubling. Not the reassuring kind of medical updates, the kind that leave sentences unfinished. She's stable, but we're still waiting on there's been a change. Those pauses matter. This is where the story shifts from public concern to private panic. Witnesses describe William pacing, stopping, starting again, the kind of restless movement you see when someone is trying to outrun a thought they're not ready to face. He wasn't performing. There were no cameras positioned for effect. No statements being read, just raw, unfiltered waiting. And waiting is where fear grows. Then came the confirmation that Kate had lost consciousness. Not exhaustion, not dizziness. Unconscious, a word that lands hard, no matter who you are. For William, it reportedly landed like a physical blow, because unconsciousness isn't just an episode, it's a doorway into uncertainty. Was it minutes? Would it be hours? Would she wake up? These are questions no amount of royal protocol can answer. What followed next is described as abrupt, a sudden shift in posture, a hand bracing against a surface, a visible struggle to stay upright. And then, the collapse. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just a body giving in when the mind can't carry the weight anymore. And here's the detail that unsettled staff the most. William didn't immediately get back up. Think about that. This is a man trained from childhood to recover instantly, to smile through discomfort, to keep moving no matter what's happening internally. The fact that he couldn't speaks volumes about the intensity of what he'd just been told. Publicly, aides moved fast, faster than usual. Screens were redirected, pathways cleared, conversations lowered to whispers. Anyone without a reason to be there was suddenly somewhere else. If you blinked, you missed it, which is exactly how the palace prefers it. But you can't erase what people feel. Those present described the atmosphere as wrong, not chaotic, not loud, just heavy, like the air itself had thickened, and in that heaviness was a realization no one wanted to voice. This wasn't just about appearances anymore. It was about fear, fear of loss, fear of change, fear of what happens to the future when the present becomes unstable. And that's the contradiction at the heart of this moment. The monarchy sells continuity. William embodies continuity, yet here he was, physically overwhelmed by a reality no institution can control. So when commentators later dismissed the fainting as stress or fatigue or a momentary issue, it missed the point entirely. This wasn't a health footnote. It was a signal, a warning flare that something far more serious was unfolding behind the scenes. Because while attention briefly shifted to William's condition, Kate was already on her way to emergency care. And the information coming in from doctors wasn't improving, it was narrowing. Shorter sentences, more urgency, fewer reassurances. And as William was helped away, still pale, still shaken, one thought reportedly echoed through the room, unspoken but unmistakable. This is bigger than we thought. Because the collapse wasn't the crisis. It was the reaction to it. And the real crisis was just beginning. Inside hospital walls the public would never see, where decisions were being made that could change everything. By the time the hospital doors closed behind Kate Middleton, the story had already slipped out of the palace's control. Here's the part that unsettled even seasoned royal watchers. This wasn't treated like a precaution. It wasn't framed as observation. It was urgent, quietly urgent. The kind of urgency that strips away ceremony and replaces it with speed. Kate had gone unconscious, and she wasn't waking up. Let's pause there, because words matter. Unconscious isn't a euphemism. It's a threshold. On one side is reassurance. On the other is unknown duration, unknown cause, unknown outcome. And once you cross that threshold, everything becomes provisional. Inside the hospital, the tone reportedly shifted fast. Medical staff moved with purpose. Questions were direct. Decisions were compressed. The usual buffer between royal patience and reality thinned to almost nothing. Titles didn't matter in that moment. Time did. And then came the word that changed how everyone breathed. Coma. Not leaked casually. Not tossed into a rumor mill. Acknowledged in a way that suggested there was no softer substitute available. For the palace, that alone was extraordinary. They avoid specificity unless there's no alternative, which raises a question no official statement can answer. What made silence more dangerous than honesty? Because once Coma entered the conversation, reassurance became impossible. A coma isn't an inconvenience, it's a suspension. A waiting room where no one can tell you how long the wait will be. Minutes feel like hours. Hours feel like years. And control, the monarchy's favorite tool, means nothing there. Outside, the public saw a trickle of information. Inside, the flow was relentless. Doctors explaining, specialists consulting, phones lighting up with names that don't usually appear on call lists. And somewhere in the middle of all that, a decision was made to say less, not more. That silence wasn't accidental. Events were postponed with vague language. Appearances were under review. Language was scrubbed clean of timelines. The palace didn't deny seriousness, but it didn't explain it either. That's a very narrow path to walk, and it told observers everything they needed to know. Something was still unfolding. Here's where the contradictions begin. If the situation was stable, why the tightened perimeter? If improvement was expected, why the sudden involvement of senior figures who normally stay at arm's length? And if this was routine, why did William remain out of sight longer than protocol usually allows? Those questions echoed far beyond hospital walls. People close to the situation describe William as present, but changed. Not pacing anymore, not restless. Quiet, focused. The kind of focus that comes when fear settles in and refuses to leave. The collapse had passed, but the weight hadn't. And this is the emotional pivot of the story. Because the fear wasn't just about Kate's condition in that moment, it was about what her absence, even temporary, would mean for their family, for their children, for a monarchy already balancing on public trust and private strain. Ask yourself this: what happens to an institution built on continuity when its most stabilizing figure is suddenly unavailable? That's the question no one wanted to ask out loud. Inside the hospital, time stretched. Updates were cautious, carefully worded. No promises. No timelines. And as hours blurred together, one reality became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a scare that would resolve itself neatly. It required waiting. And waiting is dangerous because it gives rumors space to grow and forces the palace to choose between two risks: say too much and lose control, or say too little and let others fill the gaps. They chose restraint, but restraint comes with consequences. Because as the public waited for reassurance, the people closest to the situation were bracing for possibilities they could not yet name. And every decision being made in that quiet hospital corridor would ripple outward into schedules, statements, and the future itself. The most chilling part, the doctors hadn't finished assessing the full picture yet. This is the part of the story where everything circles back to that first impossible image: Prince William on his feet. One moment, and gone the next. Because once the shock faded, once the hospital doors stayed closed longer than anyone expected, one truth became unavoidable. This wasn't just a health emergency. It was a rupture. A moment where the carefully constructed image of permanence cracked, and something deeply human spilled out. For years, the public has been told a version of the royal family built on resilience, on calm under pressure, on the idea that no matter what happens behind closed doors, the institution endures. But watching William struggle, watching him visibly overwhelmed while Kate Middleton lay unconscious, forced a reckoning the palace never wanted. Because what happens when the symbol of stability becomes the source of concern? In the hours that followed Kate's hospitalization, the palace didn't just manage information, it managed emotion, carefully. Strategically, statements were neutral. Language was softened. But emotion has a way of leaking through the seams. And the public felt it immediately. The tone was different, heavier, less assured. And people noticed. Social media didn't erupt the way it usually does. There was no frenzy, no glee, no chaos. There was worry. Genuine worry. Because Kate isn't just a royal figure. She's become a kind of emotional constant. The one who shows up. The one who steadies the room. The one who makes the monarchy feel approachable. Remove that presence even temporarily, and the silence becomes deafening. Here's the irony no one in the palace can ignore. The fainting, the coma, the sudden uncertainty, they did something years of strategy couldn't. They reminded the public that behind the titles are people who can't outmaneuver biology, fear, or fate. And that's where the story turns. Because William's collapse wasn't weakness, it was consequence. The consequence of carrying a future that suddenly felt fragile. Of realizing that no amount of preparation can protect you from the moment everything you rely on slips out of reach. Ask yourself this: if this moment shook him, what does it say about the pressure that's been building quietly for years? The palace will eventually regain control of the narrative. It always does. Updates will come. Language will tighten. Appearances will resume. But something fundamental has shifted. The illusion of invincibility is gone. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back easily. What lingers now isn't panic. It's awareness. Awareness that the monarchy's future isn't just a line of succession. It's emotional, personal, vulnerable, and dependent on people whose absence can't be filled by protocol or tradition. So when the next statement comes, and it will, listen carefully not just to what's said, but to what's avoided. Watch the timing, the wording, the faces, because those details will tell you more than any headline ever could. If this moment taught us anything, it's this: the crown can wait. Schedules can change, but when the unthinkable happens, even the strongest institutions are forced to stand still.